It was 1970. Syria, a country hoping for stability, found itself under the rule of Hafez al-Assad, an Air Force officer who was both clever and ruthless. He took control through a coup without any fighting, promising progress and unity. But this was actually the start of a very bad time for Syria, a time of harsh rule, cruelty, and the silencing of anyone who disagreed. Assad, who was part of the Alawite minority group, made sure he stayed in power by putting people loyal to him, mostly Alawites, in important positions in the military and government. This helped him control the country, but it also caused problems between different groups in Syria. The government, talking about Arab unity and being against other countries' influence, quickly created a large and powerful security system that was everywhere in Syrian life. Fear became the main way the government controlled people. Assad's intelligence agencies, called the Mukhabarat, did whatever they wanted. They watched people, stopped anyone from speaking out, and made everyone afraid to talk. Arresting people for no reason, making people disappear, and torture became normal. Anyone who even whispered against the government was quickly and harshly punished. Hafez al-Assad's Syria wasn't a place where people could speak their minds. It was a country imprisoned by its own government, where freedom was just a dream and fear was everywhere. This was the sad reality for Syria, created by the leader of the Assad family. The world watched as this new era of oppression began, not knowing the terrible things that would happen over the next 50 years. February 1982. The beautiful, historic city of Hama became a terrifying example of Assad's cruelty. A group called the Muslim Brotherhood started a rebellion, which was a serious threat to Assad. The government's response was fast and brutal. Led by Rifat al-Assad, Hafez al-Assad's brother, the Syrian army surrounded Hama. What happened next was a month of terrible violence. Tanks destroyed homes and artillery fire rained down on mosques and markets, turning the city into a scene of death and destruction. The Hama massacre, as it's known, wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. It's thought that between 10,000 and 40,000 people died, showing just how cruel the government was. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed, with people buried under the ruins. The message was clear: anyone who challenged Assad would face extreme and indiscriminate violence. The world was shocked and spoke out against it, but these were just whispers compared to the loudness of Assad's tanks. The massacre at Hama became a terrifying reminder of how brutal the government could be, a permanent scar on Syria. It was a clear warning to Syrians: opposing Assad would have a terrible price. The Hama massacre changed Syria. It started a time of widespread fear and suspicion, where everyone could be seen as an enemy of the government. The system of control became even stronger, reaching into every part of Syrian life. At the center of this system was the Mukhabarat, Assad's intelligence agencies. They were the government's spies, doing whatever they wanted and making ordinary Syrians afraid. Their methods were cruel and varied. People were arrested for no reason, taken from their homes or off the streets, often never to be seen again. Torture wasn't just used to get information, it was used to break people's spirits, to destroy them and their families. Prisons, known for their terrible conditions, became places of unimaginable suffering. Stories of torture, both physical and mental, came out of these secret prisons, showing how cruel the government was. The government's control went beyond physical repression. It controlled schools and universities, using education to teach people only what it wanted them to believe. The media, strictly controlled, became a tool for the government, spreading propaganda and stopping any other viewpoints. This created a culture of self-censorship where people were even afraid to talk privately. The Arab Spring of 2011 gave Syrians a little bit of hope. Inspired by uprisings in other countries, they started to imagine a different future, a future without Assad. It began with peaceful protests in Daraa, where children wanting change wrote anti-government slogans on their school walls. The government's response was quick and violent. Security forces shot at the peaceful protesters, killing several and causing widespread anger across the country. The protests grew quickly, fueled by decades of frustration and a desire for freedom. From Aleppo to Homs, Syrians from all backgrounds came together to demand change. But the Assad government, wanting to stay in power, chose violence instead of reform. What started as peaceful protests became a full-blown civil war. The Syrian army, meant to protect the country, attacked its own people. Towns and cities were surrounded, bombed, and starved. Other countries got involved in the conflict, each with their own goals, making the Syrian tragedy even more complicated. Extremist groups also took advantage of the chaos, making the situation even worse. As the Syrian civil war continued, the Assad government used even more terrible tactics. One of the worst was the use of chemical weapons, showing how little they cared about human life. In August 2013, a horrible attack happened in Ghouta, near Damascus. Rockets filled with sarin gas, a deadly nerve agent, were fired at sleeping civilians. Men, women, and children choked to death, their bodies shaking, their eyes burning. The images of the attack seen around the world shocked everyone. More than 1,400 people were killed in the Ghouta chemical attack, the deadliest use of chemical weapons since the Iran-Iraq War. The Assad government said they didn't do it, but it was clear they were responsible. This wasn't the only time. Throughout the war, the government used chemical weapons, chlorine gas, and barrel bombs against its own people. Hospitals, schools, and markets became targets, turning safe places into killing zones. The government's plan was to scare people into giving up. These attacks were war crimes, clearly against international law, but the Assad government wasn't punished, protected by its allies and the inaction of the world. The Syrian civil war caused one of the worst humanitarian crises in recent history. Millions of Syrians, their homes destroyed, their lives ruined, had to run for their lives, becoming refugees in their own country and others. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed, ancient cities were left in ruins, and the country was torn apart. Over 13 million Syrians, more than half the country's population before the war, were displaced. They went to nearby countries like Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, putting a strain on resources and causing problems in the region. The journey was dangerous and uncertain. Families were separated, children became orphans, and older people were left alone. Those who stayed in Syria faced terrible conditions. The economy was destroyed, hospitals couldn't function, and education stopped. The war created a generation of Syrian children who experienced violence, didn't get an education, and lost their childhoods. The world struggled to deal with the crisis. Humanitarian aid, often delayed by bureaucracy and the ongoing war, didn't reach everyone who needed it. The Syrian refugee crisis became a major problem of the 21st century, a stark reminder of the human cost of war and the failure of the world to find real solutions.